In this video that might seem very wrong or just clickbait, well, yeah, the title wasn't actually 100% true, but the thumbnail was. I will explain in this video everything about it. Center of balance does matter. It plays a crucial part in your cornering top speed. Not just cornering, but in every part of taking your car to the limit, including braking and acceleration. But your idea in how to handle center of balance, in that the car must rotate around it, that's wrong. It is very inefficient and dangerous. It's easy to get this wrong idea of center of balance, but it's also very easy to understand it perfectly. All that I've said about engine rotation is 100% true. Lewis Hamilton drives by this principle, and the rest that I will mention in this video. So let's learn from the pros. The reason I made this video, I was trying to show clearly what engine rotation is, why it matters, all the physics principles that make it an efficient key to cornering top speed. Not just an efficient key, a demanded key to cornering top speed. I was trying to make it really easy to understand. By shoving center of balance and all these other things out the window, I thought it would be easier to understand. But in this video, I will cover every key demanded for cornering top speed. There are three keys, the three most important fundamentals taking your car to cornering top speed. We're going to go through all of them in detail. Number one is center of gravity. Number two is center of balance. Number three is center of rotation. Fundamentals, as we know, work for all vehicles. In fact, all things. Everything that has weight and is traveling at a speed, changing directions, producing G-force. All three of these things are fundamental main factors. Perfection in all three of these things is demanded. We're going to start with center of gravity, and I'm going to explain everything using the example of a bike. Let's go back in time quickly when I explained everything about this in a previous video. When you're turning, the inertia of you and your bike is pushing to the outside, and that inertia is wanting to flip you and the bike over. So going lower to the side, countering the inertial forces, will help you not to flip over. So now inertia is not bothering you anymore. In fact, all that weight is 100% to your benefit. Leaning helps saturate the weight much lower down. It drops your center of gravity. You can corner faster. In a car, it's the same thing. Not as dramatic as a bike, but the principle is the same. It is slightly different though. The fact that you have four wheels, leaning and not leaning, G-forces, all this stuff doesn't just act on two tires. It acts on all four tires. Inside tires, your outside tires, your front tires, your rear tires. In your car, the center of gravity is too high. The weight will be putting pressure on the tires at the wrong angle. With inertial weight torque, it will pressurize the tires from above the tires, killing the outside of your tires that will be leaning. If your center of gravity is high enough, the angle of the car would change. The inertial weight torque will not only put pressure on your outside tires at the wrong angle, that inertial weight torque will literally pick up your inside wheels. It can flip the car. What you want is a lower center of gravity. Put their force on the tires at the right angle, so all the grip of the whole tire can be used efficiently, and not the one side of the tire be burnt out because of too much leaning from a too high center of gravity. Like I said, that I'm going to say slightly differently right now. Cars' center of gravity is quite static. That means while you're driving, there's not much you can do to change the center of gravity. You can change characteristics, lean a lot as you enter a corner, or deploy aggressive rotation on the entrance of the corner, making the car feel twitchy. But still, the way it's built, the center of gravity it has while it's not moving is the same center of gravity it's going to have while the G-forces are pressing on it. You'll have to put it on jacks, do some weight reduction, get a dry sump for your engine, carbon fiber roof, spoiler, hood, chassis reworking. Now the next one, the big debate that is very misunderstood in the world of racing, center of balance. And again, I'm going to use a bike to explain this. I've seen comments in the Pistonfury community about it being perfect driving to rotate your car around the center of balance. But rotation is a different realm. In center of gravity, center of balance, and center of rotation, there's a pivot. That pivot has a circle face. If you can see it as a circle. Now, center of balance, the circle is on the side of the car. since it is about weight distribution. Front to rear, it's the center of balance. Rotation, you can only see as a circle when you're looking from the top of the car. So in the sense of taking your car to the absolute limit, yes, center of balance and rotation and center of gravity all relate in the sense that they all work together to get the weight to full potential. But they are not the same thing. They don't do each other's jobs. They have the same principles, the same physics, but using the pivot from center of balance as a pivot for rotation, that's only bad math that's going to get you into a crash. Center of balance. So now we know what it isn't. What is it? Well, you probably got the gist of it, and now you can learn everything else, put the 2 and 2 together, and now you know how to control the center of balance. But I'm going to talk about it anyway, because there's an interesting thing I want to talk about with bikes. Let's go back in time quickly when I explained everything about this in a previous video. Leaning also points the inertia in the right direction to nail your contact patch into the ground. Or does it? You see, it doesn't just do this. All that inertia is actually pointing offset to the contact patch, because when you lean, the contact patch is massively shifted to the inside. All that inertia, it is getting balanced, but all the force is pointing to the middle of the tire, the center line, where the contact patch isn't. But there's a way to solve this. Leaning with your buttocks inside offset, this weight torque direction changes the inertia's pressure point. This is where weight torque is a good thing. All of the force is acted onto the contact patch, because you're not just leaning, you also offset at the right angle. But you got to adjust and tune perfectly how much lean and how much offset for how much speed, for how much grip, to how aggressive the corner angle is. That's the pivot, that's you. That is the contact patch. It enhances it, gives you more grip. Inertia control is all tuned by leaning and offset angles. Most MotoGP riders, when they lean on the bike and they give that offset angle sitting off the bike on the inside, usually they balance it with enough front offset and rear offset. The minor tuning you can do to the offset angle, which some people call hang off, that will just change the grip ratio front to rear. You can unbalance it, prevent the weight from adding up to full potential. You can make the weight a liability from doing it wrong. Hang off is to balance the weight and maximize grip, get full potential out of the weight to glue those tires to the road and get full potential out of the tires. The truth is, you don't want to tune it at all to get front grip or rear grip. You want it to be perfectly balanced so you can get the full potential out of the weight, you get the full potential out of the tires. Even if there's a major imbalance in the build of the bike, you want there to be the perfect weight at the perfect angle on both tires. This has nothing to do with rotating. This has everything to do with maximizing the rotation potential. This is the difference between center of balance and rotation. Both are needed to reach full potential. So perfect center of gravity at the perfect leaning angle, along with hang-off, perfectly balanced along your front and rear wheels, bring your weight to full potential so you can bring your tires to full potential. In a car, it would be controlling your weight distribution with weight transfer. For cornering, you want weight on all 4 tires. For all tires to possess 100% grip so they can be used at full potential, take you to your cornering top speed. More on center of balance, weight distribution control. When you're exiting a corner, you want all the weight on the back so you don't skid your wheels. You can exit with more power. In order to get the full potential out of your weight on the lateral level, rotation, all 4 tires and every single thing in your car needs to revolve around the Lord weight. What is the Lord weight? The Lord weight's the heaviest thing in your car. In a go-kart, it's you. In a car, it's the engine. In an S2000, the engine is mounted the front mid position. If it is going to be the pivot of rotation during cornering, the front wheels will have a small rotational axis, whereas the rear wheels, much further away from the engine, will have a super large axis. There needs to be the perfect steer angle from the front wheels and from the rear wheels in the form of slip angle, balanced along their different rotational axes around the engine. The rear wheels will be doing much more of the steering than the front wheels, since they have a much larger rotational axis. front and rear wheels' rotational axis lines will be as one rotation, and there must also be a perfectly balanced high lifted front to rear wheel speed ratio, since the rear wheels will be covering a longer distance than the front wheel during rotation, while the front wheels rotating around the engine that's just behind them will not just need the perfectly balanced steering angle to rotate around the engine around their small axis, but they will also need a perfectly balanced inside to outside wheel speed ratio. Since the S2000 is rear wheel drive with no front differential, the front wheel's inside to outside wheel speed ratio would naturally fall into place as long as the rear wheels are rotating perfectly around the engine with perfect wheel speed ratio and all that stuff. To be clear, a front to rear high lifted wheel speed ratio means the rear wheel is going faster than the front wheels. A high inside to outside means the outside wheel is going much faster than the inside wheel. Although rotation demanding drift angle is not just about any drift, this is all about being the fastest. And you gotta have your tires working at full potential if you want to be the fastest. So your tires need to be skidding in the margin between grip and drift, something I call drift. This is the perfect level at which your tires will be slipping. The angle at which you slip is a different thing. That's all about your rotational axis. As we know, they must rotate to the perfect angle, perfectly balanced along the axis of rotation around the engine. But you see, there are also a whole lot of other different cars that have different rotations. The Mitsubishi Land Evo, on the other hand, has both the front and rear wheels behind the engine, so zero front steering is wanted for rotation at all. The front and rear wheels are pushing the engine. They are not spinning around something within the wheelbase. This is why the four-wheel drive system in the Land Evo is so perfect for the balance it has. An A86 has the engine between the two front wheels. The front wheels don't need no steering angle. They're just rotating around the engine by a perfectly balanced wheel speed ratio. For a mid-engine car, on the other hand, the front wheels are doing very much most of the steering. The rear wheels will just be rotating by an aggressive inside to outside wheel speed ratio with a little bit of slip angle. It's like a back to front S2000, so that's how you rotate your wheels around your engine. However, you're not always pushing the engine like you think you would. In something like a Porsche, both the front wheels and the rear wheels are in front of the engine. It's like a backwards Mitsubishi Evo. Instead of your front and rear wheels spinning around something within the wheelbase, rather they're both following the same trajectory. The axis lines are slightly different, altogether fundamentally. The front wheels are turning the most aggressively and the rear wheels are following. So in a Porsche, you do not want any high lifted wheel speed ratio. No need for drifting either. With a 1:1 front to rear wheel speed ratio, your pivot of rotation will be right at the back where it should be. But there's more. There's weightful parts. There's your gearbox, classic example. They must also rotate around your engine. It's a fundamental. It also has an axis line related to the engine. So at the place it should be, you will be able to push the engine in the trajectory of rotation, just like the rear wheel. The Lexus LFA has an engine mounted in the front mid position just like the S2000. But the gearbox in the LFA is mounted in the mid-rear position as a transaxle, just in front of the differential, giving more rear tire grip. Rotation works the same as in an S2000, and during rotation, the rear wheels will be pushing the gearbox to push the engine. Same with an S2000, same with the Formula 1. The gearbox is in front of the rear wheels but behind the engine. They can be part of rotation since they are on the same axis line as the engine. On the other hand, a Honda NSX has a mid-rear, sideways, right offset mounted, naturally aspirated V6 engine, and a gearbox sits right next to the engine on the left. They're merged so it doesn't push the engine like the others. You just got a wider engine, like a boxer engine. The whole car rotates around them. And the NSX is nearly as well balanced as the Formula 1. What you are doing this whole time, using the weight for your advantage and not to be a liability. Each part is used to encourage rotation and not to drag the car out wide. Best care given to the tires so they have more leverage to take higher levels of lateral G-force so you can corner faster. This is perfect rotation. Remember what I said about boundaries? Yeah, I'm gonna go into it now. We're gonna do more time traveling. The truth is, for a weightful part to rotate around the engine, it mustn't only be in line in order to push the engine in the trajectory of rotation, but it must also be within a boundary where it is able to rotate. To explain how the boundary works, Let's see what happens when this weight for parts is past the boundary. Time machine.
Gearboxes are like engines, they're very big weights that should be thought through very, very well. They're not as heavy as engines, but you see a midship engine layout, and especially mid-rear, there's not a lot of space left for a gearbox because the engine is taking up all that space. You don't want to have the gearbox in front of the engine and then a drive shaft crawling up above the engine and then to the differential. That's just bad engineering. So what was invented to compensate for the space problem is called a transaxle. What it is the face value name. It's a transaxle. It's combining the transmission with the axle and the differential. So the engine will be in the mid-rear position, then it's the differential, and then it's the gearbox. This makes up for the cramped lack of space in the middle of the car, and it also gives a little more weight on the rear end so you can exit corners faster. To explain the negative about a transaxle, I need to explain something called weight torque. So we all know what torque is with an engine with a gearbox. It's multiplying horsepower by distance. A distance from the pivot of rotation. Now with power this is good. Torque is always amazing. But there's such a thing that is called weight torque. Now weight torque has the same principle. If your engine is a pivot of rotation during cornering, the engine is carrying very little torque, even though it's the major weight. It's not really affecting the car that much with its inertia. Transaxle, like I explained, it almost sits out of your rear boot. It's long and heavy. Not as heavy as an engine, but the fact is it has weight. A 430 Ferrari has a 95 kilogram transaxle gearbox. A 458 weighs in at 120 kilograms. Now you see, even if this thing was like 60 kilograms, the fact that the weight is at a greater distance from the engine, which is pivot of rotation, the weight is magnified by the distance it's at, thus making a higher level of weight torque. And the inertia from this weight torque creates an imbalance. So this weight will carry the rear out, putting pressure on your tires with its inertia. At high speed lateral G-force, taking unforgiving chicanes and corners, the rear end has a lot of weight that wants to carry the rear out. The fact is, the engine has very little weight torque. Remember in the first video when I talked about mid-engine cars and mid-rear engine cars and rear engine cars giving you snap understeer as soon as you put your foot down? What's crazy is, during acceleration and braking, the rear axle becomes a pivot of a seesaw made by the engine and transaxle counterweighting each other around the axle. This kills stability and creates excessive weight transfer, lifting up the front end during acceleration during a turn. So you can't floor it. What happens when you're accelerating during and out of a corner? The rear wheels are being swallowed by the weight torque of the gearbox. It's unbalanced. You're gonna get to a part where you're gonna feel it and you're gonna be like, I should have just bought an NSX. The Honda NSX, powered by a 3.2 liter naturally aspirated, sideways mounted, mid-rear ship V6 engine. The gearbox is right next to it on the left. Then it's the differential, right by the gearbox. It's so close it's basically a transaxle, but not one that sticks out of the boot. This gives enough weight on the rear end to plant it, but it does this without giving excessive weight torque hanging off the rear end. There's nothing beyond the differential. Only the exhaust muffler, lol. The engine has the pivot of rotation during cornering. The front wheels have a long axis to rotate around, while the rear wheels have a super short axis to rotate around. Almost no axis. But the fact is, they are rotating around the engine with wheel speed difference. That's the whole point of having a differential. And as you accelerate through the corner, you can floor it through the corner. And all that will happen is the car will go faster around the corner. It's almost invincible to understeer. A well-balanced car does not have any disturbing weight torque. So it is able to handle a lot of abuse, unforgiving curves and cambers, anything. Take it to Imola, or it'll eat that track for breakfast. Take it to the mountain pass. Guess what? It grew up there. This is how the NSX managed to have suspension as soft as marshmallows, but still be an amazing supercar. The NSX-R, the ultimate model. When Keiichi Tsuchiya reviewed it, said, when a car is built to perfection, it becomes an NSX-R. You notice the difference between the NSX-R and the normal NSX? A little bit of weight reduction and stiffened suspension. They didn't even put canards. They didn't even have some clever undercarriage aerodynamic system. Keiichi, the drift king himself, said, I will never replace my NSX until I find a better rear end. He also said that when the NSX understeers or oversteers, it is always your fault. The car, it is faultless. This is what you call perfect balance. I do not care if you have 800 or even 2000 horsepower. The NSX is still better balanced. Case closed. The NSX is a perfectly balanced supercar that needs to be driven with a little bit more aggression than a Ferrari. A Ferrari is delicate. Why? Because it's unbalanced. A Ferrari is not delicate because it wants to be pretty. The weight is magnified by the carry the rear out, putting pressure around the axle. This kills stability during excessive so you can't floor it. Was I wrong about transaxles? Well, let's find out. Formula One is the industry honing the greatest formula for something with explosions and four wheels. The Formula One is self-explanatory. It is the best formula, slowing down the fastest, accelerating the fastest, and taking a corner the fastest. So every evolution is, or at least should be, making the car better and faster. The same case is for car companies, but a lot of the time, especially for these car companies that have been here for centuries, performance is influenced by style, emotion, and heritage. What do I mean? A car company is much less eager to dump a signature component of theirs in favor of a better performing component. Till this day, Lamborghini is using V12s when they could just get a 2-liter V6 engine, can make more power with turbos and ethanol and methanol and whatever. But what is the damage done when a car company clings to their heritage? Two cars that really stand out for me is the death oversteer Widowmaker, aka Porsche 911, and the other one is the Ferrari. In F1, there's always been an innovation hustle. Insane systems like a fan, active suspension, and turbos and all. When turbos were reaching their peak of making F1 cars go over 1,300 horsepower, some even 1,400 horsepower, Senna's Lotus had a power-to-weight ratio of around 2,000 horsepower per ton. Just think about that for a second, let it sink in. But then in 1989, turbos were banned. All these perks. Sometimes it was for the reason of pure domination that these great innovations were banned. Sometimes safety reasons. But most of the time, it was to force best efficiency of what's already there. This was racing wisdom speaking. And from the years back in F1, just when they moved from front engine to mid-engine, the build was simple. Mid-rear engine, huge heavy transaxle, rear wheel drive. No aero, no rear wing, no front wing, no traction control. In GT racing there has been the same competition, with the same sort of goal and point in mind of just having the best formula to be the fastest. But it was milder. You can't deny it, it was milder. I mean, one rule famous in GT racing, the most important rule, sometimes it was written, sometimes it was an unwritten rule. But this great rule was that every car must be based on a road car. This is the game of more limits and challenges. Not as straightforward as F1 or Pikes Peak, you know. But there was one brand that stood out above the rest with the sole purpose just to be the fastest. Enzo Ferrari himself said,
Others build race cars to sell road cars. I sell road cars to race cars.
Keep that in mind. They built F1, road, and GTs since 1947. They have grown over the years with one purpose: to be the fastest. But Enzo had a problem. That was his stubbornness, his hatred in evolution, just like me. He despised the innovation of the Germans, you know, the idea of a beetle.
The horse must pull the carriage.
But after a while of grinning and trying to win, he made a mid-engine Ferrari. And from that time till now, Ferrari has specialized in one build: mid-rear engine with a transaxle gearbox, rear wheel drive.
Coming back to Formula One, from the time of black and white 600-ton box TVs till the late 90s of F1 cars were running in this layout of mid-rear engined, transaxle, rear-wheel drive. Ferrari raced in Formula One from those days till now, and they are extremely successful. But from the late 90s till now, Formula One has known what a transaxle is, and so have road cars like the Carrera GT and NSX. If you don't know the whole boo-ha and problem with the transaxle that made Formula One evolve out of that into what I think is the greatest formula ever, then check out this video, the second video on balance. You'll see how an NSX thrashed a 296 Ferrari. But back to this video, you know the Ferrari, and they have kept this build of the old F1 cars from the 70s till now. Mid-rear engined, transaxle and rear wheel drive. Ferrari stood out because they have taken the transaxle as a weapon and not try to hide its so-called weakness. A 918, it's four-wheel drive. McLaren, they have an electrically controlled open differential with electronic hydraulic suspension. All these fancy things to hide the liability of a transaxle. But is it really a liability? Instead of using advanced electronic technology, Ferrari has been known to do what they do best, pure finesse. And it's been demonstrated in many situations. Fernando Alonso is not a bad driver. He just specialized in his own technique that doesn't suit this weak rear-ended Aston Martin. Keep that in mind. So you question, am I right or not? And how is a Ferrari fast if you said it's unbalanced? That's what I'm gonna answer in today's video. And I'm gonna put the final nail in the coffin of single perspective. Kick out your narrow mind and get your coffee, because we're about to sit on this topic for a while. Niki Lauda, three-time Formula One world champion. He raced in the 70s, sneaking a little bit into Senna's day. He is one of the best Formula One drivers, truly one of my favorites, all because he had a unique technique that was made for the F1 car he drove. This is special, that a driver's technique also fits their car perfectly. Because here's the thing, there are techniques that are honed by people that can be mastered as a technique, but that can't fit all cars perfectly. And sometimes, racing a certain car, it will still be fast, but it is not the absolute limit of the car, even though his technique is mastered. But Niki Lauda is one driver who stands out because he managed to do this properly. This is why he's one of my favorites. Niki Lauda's second name is Smooth, and his last name is Ferrari. He accomplished perfect rotation in his Formula One car. First of all, let's go over the F1 he piloted. It was a Ferrari 12T. It had a mid-rear flat 12 engine, pumping out 513 horsepower. Then it was the differential, then it was the transaxle, rear wheel drive. And this car weighed in at 575 kilograms. That's nearly a 1-to-1 power to weight ratio. And what made Niki Lauda special, as I said, is that his technique went perfectly with the car he drove. In his 312 Ferrari, Niki would trail brake hard and turn in, lifting off the brake, deaccelerating. As he is deaccelerating in the corner, the transaxle's inertia would push the engine, offset on the side of the engine, measured by the turning angle he would put in to rotate the engine.
Because the transaxle's position in rotation, it pushes the engine like the rear wheels of an 86. Only this time, in the Ferrari, you're using the transaxle's inertia. That is why the acceleration is key.
Encouraging harder turning, equaling a perfect revolution. It did half of the job of turning for him. He used the transaxle to turn harder. He used it for his advantage during hard braking. He handled the wheel like a delicacy. Sometimes he would hardly be steering. The transaxle would be doing some of the steering for him. Driven right, the transaxle encourages rotation.
Entering a turn too fast, and the transaxle will sort it out for you, rotating the Ferrari around the turn. This is actually a technique of turning a Ferrari. They love diving understeer.
enter fast, deaccelerating, forming the Ferrari to lean toward understeer a little bit, but keep just enough angle to let the transaxle push the side of the engine, rotating the engine to make all four wheels and the transaxle rotate around the engine, take the corner fast as possible. The whole point is to enter on deacceleration. That's the way the transaxle and the four wheels can perfectly rotate around the engine. It is the fastest way to drive a Ferrari. In this way, the transaxle does what Keiichi Tsuchiya does with his feet in an NSX. How not to drive a Ferrari? The offset turning angle decides the weight, torque, aggression of the transaxle's inertia. You want the transaxle to push your engine at the angle. If it misses the engine, it will drag the rear out wide, and the engine will also be dragged out. The whole car will just go wide and you'll spin out. A too high, unbalanced wheel speed ratio will also take out the rear end. But driven right, no one is able to outbrake you.
I can't beat a driver I can't outbrake.
Michael Schumacher is one incredibly special driver that was able to manipulate his whole car's every single action with engine braking, throttle input, steering, braking, coasting. He could adjust whether he wants more understeer or oversteer as if he was just turning a knob. And that is how you can make a transaxle work to your advantage and not be a liability. But you've got to understand this. There are two modes your Ferrari has. First is rotation mode, and the other is exit mode. You'll kill yourself if you are switching between these at the wrong time. And yes, it is literally that crazy. The rotation mode is what we've been talking about, using your transaxle to your advantage for cornering speed. Exit mode is acceleration. You'll understand now why there are two different modes. Blindly opening the throttle in mid-turn and your front wheels will lift off the ground as the transaxle deploys excessive rearward weight transfer. Okay, your front wheels won't literally lift off the ground. You'll just greatly understeer. The Ferrari will straighten up and you will lose all your rotation. Because it's switching modes, you're gonna blindly open the throttle like this. This is unbalanced driving at its finest. If you are complaining about your front end lifting off the ground when you open the throttle, you're supposed to have entered the turn faster and still be deaccelerating. If you've been picturing the whole case of one corner in a Ferrari perfectly done, yes, you've probably also thought about lines, how different a Ferrari would take its line compared to an NSX. The line is where everything should come into view, if you don't already have it in view. The technique to rotate a Ferrari favors a modified V-line as standard. Due to the rotation magic deep dives that a Ferrari does finest. This is usually demonstrated to be the fastest way to corner with a Ferrari. Watch an onboard of a professional driver. The basis of driving is controlling your center of gravity. Do not forget that. Okay, now, the way I described opening the throttle in mid-corner, it is 100% true, but there is an exaggeration. I know you are not that bad of a driver. Gradual throttle opening can allow you to open the throttle earlier. That's what Niki Lauda is all about. Smoothness. And there's another Formula One driver I have to mention. Someone else with a bizarre technique. Truly one of my favorite drivers. And his name is Ayrton Senna. Through a turn, he would kick the throttle at a rate high enough to keep the engine revs high, so the turbo stays spooled up. But every kick of his was so fast. He would lift off the throttle so fast enough after the kick, so that the suspension does not react to the kick and transfer all the weight backwards during mid-corner. His line stayed linear. In this way, by the exit, he made a 500-year lagging turboed engine respond like a naturally aspirated one without unsettling the car. And with this technique, he could exit corners like a Druid of Wrath. Do you still want to ask why Senna and Niki Lauda and Michael Schumacher and all these drivers are so highly regarded? So to answer the question, is a Ferrari unbalanced? If you drive it like an NSX, 100%, yes, it is unbalanced. F1 proves that it's not even the best build. They dished it long ago before Alonso's time. But does driving it right make up for its liabilities? Make up. The transaxle is an advantage. This is how Ferrari kept their signature build, specialized in it and refined it, and made it a true masterpiece. I mean, personally, if you ask me, what would you rather have, a Ferrari or NSX? Okay, obviously I'm going to choose the NSX. I prefer its build, but that doesn't take away any of Ferrari's trophies they've earned over the years. Ferrari's road cars are really not near the best performing cars, but that's a story for another video. You know now how to drive a Ferrari. So drive it right and don't complain about understeer when you open the throttle. If you've been watching the video till now, you might as well subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Well, it turns out you can rotate even when you're out of the boundary. Or, well, sometimes. Just because acceleration rotation doesn't work as cool as it does in an NSX or S2000 or an RX-7 or a Formula 1 car doesn't mean you can't rotate it. Whereas on the other hand, in something like a Lamborghini, where the gearbox is in front of the engine, well, that's a weight torque liability. It's just a dead weight. It's being pulled by the front wheels. It's not part of rotation. It's offline because it's off the boundary. Best case scenario within the boundary, little weightful part, you must be in front of the rear wheels but behind the engine. Or you can merge with the engine like the NSX's gearbox. But then you also need ballasts because you're not as heavy as the engine. You can't have a right to left imbalance. But they should explain it. But if drifting is the way to rotate an S2000, why don't I see that more often? Time machine!
Taking an FR to full potential, you have to drift it. But there's a blind spot in the theory. As much as I'd hate to admit it, this perfect rotation seems to wear out tires. Or does it? The fact is that skidding the rear tires creates more tire to road friction in the wrong way. Grip turning with your fronts. Your front tires are grabbing the road tightly and throwing it behind. But drifting the rears are diagonally pointing. They're not grabbing the road and throwing it behind exactly like the fronts are. With the pivot of rotation so far front that there's such a big offset angle for the rear wheels to rotate around the engine, it's still rotating, but the rear tires are acting like a brake because it has blocking friction. The blocking friction is not as bad as it would be if the car was literally sideways, but I mean, it's still there. The tires, even while accelerating, I mean, it's still in that position. It's still slowing down, blocking the car from moving forward to a point.
It is a fight of blocking and grabbing.
Wearing out your tires. The tire is fighting against itself. It's self-destructing. You're still rotating, you're still moving towards a direction. But if you manage to accelerate enough in order to not be decelerating while you're rotating, man, your tires are going to be gone in a few because of the harsh fight of acceleration and deceleration on the same tire. Because of this blocking friction side effect, there's a really clever technique of rotation that has been adopted by very few amazingly skillful drivers, and it is called the brake drift. It's used sometimes in rally. Keiichi Tsuchiya drives with this technique sometimes. It's the same rotation we've been talking about, but your rears are absorbing the impact of the friction.
You're putting the friction to good use.
And the whole car is decelerating from that as you're braking and turning into the corner. No acceleration, no open throttle. You brake drifting into the corner, from entrance to mid-corner. Sometimes even near exit. And then you must totally slam the gas pedal at the exit. This brake drift technique is so efficient, like the transaxle rotating a Ferrari during deceleration, turning into the corner. No one can outbrake you. The Mazda RX-7 with the same way rear wheel steering works insane with this technique. Probably the best. Watch how this Kia race car did a 4-wheel rotation, braking, drift. It's not perfect, but man, this is the greatest overtake of all time. This guy right beside his opponent backs out from beside him due to no room. Then he pulls off a drift entry, and for a small moment of that entry, drifting on deceleration with a perfect 4-wheel rotation, Can you see how the car is gravitating towards the trajectory that the car is facing? It's gravitating to the apex. The whole car just wants to go in that direction. But then he drifted a bit too much, he counter-steered. But for that key moment, oh, you gotta adore his driving. Pushing the little Kia. There was enough rotation to pull off the move. He performed a near perfect braking drift entry. No, come on, there's gotta be another way. I gotta be able to rotate my car. There's gotta be the most efficient way to drive, rotating it around the engine. That's what you said. How can driving my S2000 the best to full potential be self-destruction? Sorry, what did you say about S2000? Don't you think there had to be a reason I say the S2000, AMG, GTR, and Daytona are the best? Come on, man, I don't say things for nothing. There are levels to rotation, there are levels to blocking friction, and there are levels to tire walking, or tire grabbing, or slip angle. All the same thing. Let me explain this to you and show you how it works with the chart. The more or less angle you need to rotate the rear wheels due to engine placement, the more or less blocking friction you have. As you see, the toe has an influence on the tires, but this is so little, and the truth is, it's on purpose to keep the tires hot enough on the straights. While they're not doing any cornering, they're just going straight. The tires are not twisting, they're not compressing, so there's hardly any heat. They need to stay hot for the next corners coming up. So that's the usefulness of toe. But it gives so little blocking friction, it's almost not worth mentioning. The first few legends, the 296 and NSX, mid-rear engine cars, rear-wheel drive, so they have almost zero friction. The Lamborghini Aventador, even though it is a mid-engine car, not mid-rear as a 296 or an NSX, it has the same amount of blocking friction due to the opposing rear wheel steering that rotates the rear wheels for you. The AMG 1 here also, the masterpiece that I'm going to talk about in a future episode. It's also right there. They are such well thought through, great balanced cars, all these that I've mentioned. They hardly produce blocking friction. When the S2000 comes is where it starts getting a little bit bad. But for the S2000, it's still not bad enough to call drifting a liability. Proper rotation in an S2000, it works. Shelby Daytona, even better, with the engine being behind the front wheels and not just behind the front axle. AMG GTR has opposed rear wheel steering, again just like the SVJ, to do some of that rotation for you. So it's slightly better than the S2000 even. But the problem comes now. The 8.6 and the Land Evo have it worst, especially the Evo. With the engine of the 8.6 in the front position, whereas the Evo's engine is directly in front of the front axle, which gives the Evo's rear wheels the largest rotation access out of all the cars we've talked about. This is what makes the S2000 Viper and Daytona simply better designed than the Evo and 8.6. It's more balanced. It's just plain better. The Evos and Civics and all, their tires are fighting against themselves. The whole car is self-destructing during rotation. Oh, and when you're not rotating, you're still killing your tires, pulling your engine. Perfect rotation doesn't work for them because they are just flawed. The engine placement is not listening to the tires. Once again, it is proven where there is discord, there is destruction.
But the truth is, implementing only some attributes of rotation into your driving can still be fast. It is still rotation. A high lifted front to rear wheel speed ratio favoring rear wheels moving faster can act on the chassis to almost push the engine mass farther rear and make turning faster and easier on the front tires. DK perfected driving an S2000, Evo and GTR with all the attributes of rotation except for the offset angle drift part. Look at how he handles this GTR so well, but sometimes he would make short bursts of drift rotation to turn tighter and harder. DK brought these and many more cars near their limits using various attributes of rotation. In the case of the Evo, incomplete rotation around some turns might be the fastest.
So is drifting faster than gripping? If you do it right, for some cars, yes, drifting is totally better. Drifting is one of the attributes to their full potential. But if you're driving a car with the engine in front of the front axle or something, then only pull off a brake drift entry. By the middle of the turn, I want to know that all four wheels are perfectly gripping and you're accelerating, darting out of that corner like a Druid of Wrath.
But no, it's not, oh, you can still rotate even though you're not drifting. You do not have to drift in order to rotate. Because when you have the perfect slip angle, you have to have the perfect wheel speed ratio. Wheel speed ratio is the basis of rotation. Think about it, there are many ways to rotate a car properly. But every single technique to rotate comes back to wheel speed ratio, the basis of rotation. Let's watch this onboard, see how this Ferrari is being rotated by this professional driver. This is an AF Corsa Ferrari. Just saying. Brakes hard, slight turning to angle the car. When he comes near turning, it goes to half to quarter brake, just provoking a very slight lifted wheel speed ratio to provoke the perfect rotation around the engine, sufficient for that corner. Then after the trail brake, and he's sitting on the inside, he just coasted, keeping a good sense of balance, enough grip on that front axle and enough on the rear. Then he deploys exit grip, stamping on the throttle. Exits the corner like a Druid of Wrath. This guy in the Porsche coming towards the slowest chicane at Road Atlanta, going on the downhill full throttle, brakes hard, angles the car a little bit of the steering, but he only goes full turn in, big steering angle, once he's completely lifted off the brake. He doesn't use the brake to lift up the wheel speed ratio, because it's a Porsche. He just balances the center of balance and shoots through the corner. Perfection in driving is possible. You just gotta strive for it. Here's one quote by me. If driving faster on 1 kilometer is what will make your lap time faster, and meters make kilometers, and millimeters make meters, then you must focus on every single hair of your drive. Strive for perfection, petrolheads. Happy balance.